Good evening or good afternoon, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is episode 18 of the KMG show. So, you remember in A Clockwork Orange when Alex says that the world isn't really the world until you can video it on the big screen? Well, it seems that in today's world, something isn't really real unless it happens or until it happens to celebrities. And we have our first two celebrity victims of the Wu flu, of the coronavirus. According to the Associated Press, Tom Hanks and his wife Rita Wilson are isolated in stable condition in an Australian hospital Thursday after contracting the new coronavirus. The two-time Oscar winner is easily the most famous person yet to disclose they had COVID-19. Hank said he and Wilson had felt tired with colds, aches, and slight fevers. To play things right, as is needed in the world right now, we were tested for the coronavirus and were found to be positive. He said that they would be isolated for as long as public health and safety requires. Australian officials said the couple was being treated at a Queensland hospital, and the Premier of Queensland said, "We wish them a very speedy recovery." So let's look at the markets. The markets are not the economy, but everyone now pretends that they are, so I guess we have to take them very seriously indeed. The Dow was down 10%. 2,352 points. S&P 500 down 9.5%. The NASDAQ down 9.4%. And let's see, the VIX, or the Scaredy Cat Index, as I like to call it, was up 40%. Stock futures point to more losses Friday following black market's worst day since Black Monday. And the U.S. Federal Reserve announced $1.5 trillion of relief. Donald Trump gave a speech to the American nation last night. And, well, I guess it depends on which side of the aisle you're on as to whether the speech was a success or not. Michael Goodwin in the New York Post said, "Big and bold, optimistic and compassionate, President Trump's Oval Office address was exactly what America needed to hear. This is what it looks like when a president rises up to meet a crisis head on. With fear and panic spreading across the land and threatening to take down the economy, Trump is facing the greatest test of his presidency. Although battle-hardened by brutal fights with Democrats, the biased media, and foreign adversaries, he is presented with problems of a different magnitude with the coronavirus. It is a global menace that has declared war on America. Truth be told, sometimes in recent weeks, the president has appeared to be a reluctant commander-in-chief. Thankfully, as of Wednesday night, that reluctance is history, replaced by a president who left no doubt that he is all in on the battle against the deadly scourge. Now effectively a wartime president, Trump's repeated assurances of victory were music to the ears of a rattled nation. Now, a lot of people seem to think that Trump looked tired during his address. There were complaints that his eyes were puffy. And needless to say, a great many people on social media are exulting in what they believe to be Trump's ill health. I don't think, well, we'll see. We'll see. I guess everything is all up in the air. But it's good. I'm certainly relieved that Trump has stopped talking about the market and is actually talking instead about coronavirus. So what's the negative side? Oh, Sebastian Smith of Agence France-Presse said, tasked with reassuring the U.S., Trump fumbles and fumes. President Donald Trump had one job to do in a primetime address on coronavirus: reassure an anxious nation, a panicking stock market, and divided world. Instead, he left many confused and more scared. Oval Office addresses are an American tradition in times of crisis. a set-piece event reminding the country that the president heading the world's most powerful office is there to guide. Yet Trump's short speech late Wednesday featured a tired-looking president responding to the global coronavirus pandemic and resulting economic fallout with a mix of bluster, blaming, and a jaw-dropping error. Announcing the drastic measure of halting all travel from Europe, where the virus is running rampant, Trump added that the ban would include the tremendous amount of trade and cargo and various other things. If Americans watching television might have been confused, investors were in shock. So when Trump doesn't act, well, he's a do-nothing president. When he does act, apparently it's shocking. I suppose it's not possible to have any kind of bipartisan alliance over anything in the United States now. Joel B. Pollack tweets, when markets crashed in 2008, Barack Obama and John McCain put disagreements aside and offered help to President George W. Bush. What Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders are doing is the opposite, and it is arguably disqualifying. Oh, let's see, Megyn Kelly. What does Megyn Kelly have to say? I'm so frustrated right now that we can't trust the media to tell us the truth without inflaming it to hurt Trump. That Trump is misled so many times, we no longer know when to trust his word. That even I, as a journalist, am not sure where to turn for real info on COVID. Oh, and that is a terrible state of affairs when even a journalist like the respected Megyn Kelly is at a loss. How about Jennifer Gunter, Dr. Jen Gunter, Dr. Sexpants? What does she have to say? Okay, Twitter is making me anxious. I am not an anxious person, but as there is little good news about COVID-19 right now, and governments in North America are making it worse, I am going to take a mental health break for the day. Wash your hands, and FFS, don't go to any parades. And in a classic of paranoia, last night, Dr. Sexpants tweeted, I just keep thinking The Handmaid's Tale started with a national crisis and travel bans, which led one wag to respond that I just keep thinking that Withnail and I started with two men in a room coughing. So we hear so much about anxiety these days, and I guess anxiety is going to be off the charts, particularly for affluent white female liberals who are not going to be able to travel to Europe. They're not going to be able to take selfies in front of the Louvre or any of the great cathedrals, which is a terrible, terrible shame. From Breitbart, Bernie Sanders calls for Trump to be replaced on coronavirus by Congress and experts. Sanders called on President Trump to declare an emergency, something Trump already did on January 31st, and then added that the president should essentially be replaced. Quote, because President Trump is unwilling and unable to lead selflessly, we must immediately convene an emergency bipartisan authority of experts to support and direct a response that is comprehensive, compassionate, and based first and foremost on science and fact. In other words, Congress, in a bipartisan manner, must take responsibility for addressing this unparalleled crisis. Sanders did not explain what constitutional mechanism he would use to transfer the president's authority. The senator from Vermont also blamed America's healthcare system for the crisis, saying the U.S. was at a disadvantage because we do not guarantee healthcare to all people as a right. Well, I suppose that would mean that countries that do have national healthcare, single-payer healthcare, such as Canada, Britain, and others, they don't have the coronavirus. Wait, they do? Oh, how about that? Sanders also warned that the number of casualties may actually be higher than what the armed forces experienced in World War II. Well, Breitbart doesn't mention that, but it was roughly 400,000. Sanders and his rival for the 2020 Democratic Party presidential nomination, former Vice President Joe Biden, each gave addresses Thursday, both highly partisan in tone and critical of the president's efforts thus far. Biden released a plan for confronting the pandemic that repeated many steps Trump has already taken and added a few others, including action to fight climate change, though it did not explain what one issue had to do with the other. Yes, we definitely, Americans definitely want Joe Biden to take the reins during these difficult times. The man who confuses his wife with his sister and doesn't know what day it is or what state he is in or what office he is contending for. From CNBC, Jim Cramer believes the White House is debating big plans to combat coronavirus and ease markets. I'll just mention at this point, with regard to anxiousness, that one thing that people could do would be to stop reading the Drudge Report. Some people are really enjoying this crisis, and of course, scared people means more clicks. Jim Cramer said Thursday that he believes the government is debating big options. He made these comments after the S&P 500's first level 7% down circuit breakers kicked in and paused trading for 15 minutes. I think that's about to change, he said, about the uncertainty about what further actions the Trump administration may take to deal with the coronavirus fallout. I think that they will perhaps consider the idea that the federal government does not need to be paid during this period, so therefore the people, the working people, get paid and are protected. I think they are debating the notion about whether they should have a trust fund, also debating the notion right now about whether the Federal Reserve should be able to guarantee credit lines. The Treasury Trust Fund would indeed perhaps take advantage of the lower rates and make it so that people feel their credit lines would be backed up. I believe that some of these plans that I mentioned are being debated right now, and I feel better. You're going to get clarity. Later Thursday, President Trump said the markets will be just fine. I do wish he would stop speaking about the markets. So the Congress is shutting the U.S. Capitol, House, and Senate buildings to public until April the 1st. Oh, and we have more celebrities involved in coronavirus news. Our own Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. How about that? That his wife, Sophie Gregoire Trudeau, recently returned from a speaking event in the UK. And last night, she was experiencing mild flu-like symptoms. Trudeau tweeted on Thursday, "She's feeling better, but following the advice of our doctor, she is self-isolating as we wait on COVID-19 test results." Now, I have some questions about this. Why exactly is Prime Minister Trudeau's wife giving speeches? What is it that she does that would put her in a position so that people would come out to hear her? And why did she travel outside of the country to the United Kingdom to give a speech? Aren't we all supposed to be doing things to lessen the risk of getting it? Although Trudeau himself was not exhibiting any symptoms, he said out of an abundance of caution, he is also self-isolating until his wife's test results are returned. I was looking forward to sitting down with premiers and Indigenous leaders later today. Oh, I bet he was. But given the circumstances, we'll be postponing our meeting. In the meantime, we'll speak on the phone about how we can mitigate the spread and impact of COVID-19 and keep Canadians safe. Trudeau's office suggested the Prime Minister's decision was a case of practicing what he's been preaching to Canadians. No, you don't want to isolate Canada because that would be racist. That would induce the dreaded stigma. So by all means, have your wife fly to the United Kingdom. Not being left behind was New Democratic Party leader Jagmeet Singh. Said he's at home feeling unwell, and though his doctor does not believe his symptoms are consistent with COVID-19, he was advised to limit contact with the public until I am feeling better. So what can the government do? Well, it seems to me that, situations like this, it's force majeure, All bets are off. According to the Sacramento Bee, public closures, a ban on gatherings, quarantine notices, and orders for isolation have become increasingly common as the coronavirus continues to spread. Officials in Washington State and San Francisco are limiting the number of people allowed to attend public gatherings. The governor of California urged the cancellation of all events with more than 250 people in attendance. The governor of Kentucky, a Bible Belt state, has asked churches and other religious institutions to temporarily cancel services. But if it seems these actions are infringing on individual freedoms guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution, think again. You don't have a right to assemble against the backdrop of known public health risk, said James Hodge, the director of the Center for Public Health Law and Policy at Arizona State University. As the number of coronavirus cases climbs, he said, the types of aggressive measures taking place in some parts of the country will be used elsewhere. As of Thursday, more than a dozen states from California to North Carolina have declared a state of emergency to try and stop the spread. Hodge said those declarations help shape how public health officials can respond at the state and local level, enabling them to act fast while instituting forms of social distancing, which is one of the only tools we have available to us. And I'll have more to say on social distancing in a few minutes. It's not that we don't have time for First Amendment interests, it's that we must act fast, he said. What was opened today can be closed tomorrow. As mentioned earlier, Trump has banned travel from Europe, but there is an exception for the United Kingdom. The Daily Mail reports desperate Americans spark bedlam at European airports. Flyers pay up to $20,000 for flights from Paris to get back home before Trump's travel ban kicks in. Hundreds of travelers, confused as to whether they will be let back home, rushed to airports Wednesday. U.S. citizens were left shrouded in confusion by the details of the proposal, scrambling to the Spanish and French airports in the early hours of Thursday morning, uncertain about how the ban would impact them. VP Mike Pence fueled the coronavirus chaos on Thursday by saying all Americans returning from coronavirus epicenter Europe will be asked to self-quarantine for 14 days upon arrival. Yes. We see that churches have been closed in Italy. What does the Vatican believe now, that people don't need the sacraments anymore? China says the peak of coronavirus epidemic has passed. And this comes from the National Health Commission, the Chinese National Health Commission, and the comments were made by commission statesman, or spokesman rather, Mi Feng. So, you know, that's got to be true. It's coming from the Chinese government. So, according to The Week, if you think things have gotten bad in the United States, where St. Patrick's Day parades have been canceled, Toronto's is still on, by the way, and the NBA is suspended for the rest of the season. Major League Baseball has announced that it is shutting down spring training, and it's not going to start its season until further notice. Just wait until you hear about Norway. Starting Thursday, the small Nordic country announced measures that will be the most extensive Norway's population has experienced in peacetime, and which involve practically shutting down the entire country to slow the spread of the new coronavirus. In addition to kindergartens, childcare facilities, schools, and universities closing nationwide, and a ban on both professional and amateur sports, measures that have been taken only regionally so far in the U.S., the entire country of Norway is also requiring all hairdressers, massage clinics, gyms, and tattoo parlors to close. Well, if you're going to close schools, that's a very serious problem for a lot of parents, because what is going to happen to the children? Oh, yes. As I mentioned earlier, seem to be glorying in coronavirus. They see it as an opportunity to settle scores. According to the London Daily Express, outrage as Remainers taunt coronavirus to kill old people and swing Brexit vote. Brexiteers have reacted with outrage after taunts by Remainers online that coronavirus will kill old people and thus swing the vote. Several posts were shared online where people appeared to delight in the outbreak, which has hit the elderly community hard. One social media user who previously posted about stopping Brexit wrote in a sick post, "If COVID-19 kills a hefty amount of old people in this country, does that mean the general opinion will swing away from Brexit?" Another Twitter user said, "Coronavirus is the ghost of Brexit coming to kill the old people for voting wrong." I guess that is the next step in woke democracy, is to simply start killing people who are not making the right choices at the ballot box. Someone else wrote, if I get coronavirus, I'm targeting old people who voted Brexit. How would you identify them? It's not as if they wear pins. People reacted with fury online regarding the series of callous posts. Yeah, how about that? This hasn't yet become elite opinion, but I imagine that it could. That the great replacement is not happening fast enough, so we have to kill off all of the boomers. How about Vox Day? Well, Vox Day seems to be very smug about this whole business, notwithstanding the fact that he lives in Italy. Yes, what does he have to say? Now, you are certainly welcome to bluster and posture about how you aren't afraid of no virus, or pontificate concerning the probabilities that Corona Chan is just a hoax and so forth. I don't mind that sort of thing. Everyone deals with these situations in a wide variety of different ways. Personally, I find the bluster prone to be as needlessly annoying as the panic stricken. But what I do mind is actively telling people not to prepare for 2 to 3 weeks of quarantine, and here is why. Preparation is necessary if you are planning to stay home and keep the excursions outside to a minimum. We all understand that. But what most people fail to keep in mind is that if you or anyone in your family even gets knowingly exposed to the virus, much less actually comes down with a case of the Wu flu, you will be facing the same 2 to 3 weeks of home quarantine. Only then it will be too late for you to obtain the necessary supplies. And then you will become an unnecessary burden on someone else to keep you supplied. I understand that not everyone believes a 9-month supply of red and white wine supplemented by a 6-month supply of Prosecco, yes, we're ready now, is necessary. But there is literally no harm in doing the month's grocery shopping ahead of time, and it might make your family's life considerably more easy in the next 6 to 8 weeks if you take the trouble to do so. One more thought on the subject. If a Corona Chan is a hoax being perpetrated by the good guys for storm-related purposes, FFS play along. Apparently Crazy Days and Nights, which is a gossip site, says, does anyone think this will turn into the purge? Yeah. I wonder, it seemed to me that Vox Day had indicated that this could lead to the boomer cost, which I guess that he is looking forward to. I guess there's a lot of people on both the right and the left who believe that there is no problem in life that can't be solved simply by killing millions of people. Gregory Cochrane, who seems like a very sensible fellow, writes, we need enough lockdown and social distancing to drive the R0 below 1.0. And yes, everyone's talking about R0 now, and all of these people, we have all of these people claiming expertise in this subject. As I say, Cochrane is a sensible fellow and highly intelligent. That doesn't require much more effort than the intensity required to flatten the curve, and it has an enormous payoff. New cases fade away instead of growing. Like I said, there is no substitute for victory. But we don't want that lockdown to persist forever. It's incredibly expensive. I estimate that China has lost more than hundreds of billions of dollars in their current freeze. We will too. And judging from the course of events in Italy, we'll have to impose pretty severe lockdown if we want to get transmission under control. Maybe it won't have to be as severe as in China or Italy. The US has some favorable factors, mainly lower population density and more private cars as opposed to public transportation. All this must be paired with a crash program to develop effective therapies and or means of prevention. If someone has an idea for a new drug or a new method of treatment, he should rethink it and ask if it could be accomplished in half the time with twice the money, or for that matter, with 10 times the money. We should fund every plausible approach, a bit like the Manhattan Project. Some would be surprising. For example, there is evidence that already having one viral disease, say influenza, can reduce your chances of catching another. True at both the population and individual level, perhaps because your interferon is revved up. Old-fashioned approaches like serum therapy might be revived. We can scan the existing pharmacopoeia for something useful. We can mine HMO data to see if some common drug is already having a positive effect. The US has the world's strongest biomedical research community. We can do this, and we won't be alone. When we succeed, the lockdown will soon end. With a treatment or some form of prevention, we don't have to worry about the ongoing cases in other parts of the world, and then we could just help the rest of the world, which is no bad thing. Cost is no object. There is no way to spend money on biomedical research that is in any way comparable with the cost of lockdown. One advantage, we can cut some corners because coronavirus is so dangerous. We thought vaccination against smallpox too hazardous, a disease extinct in the wild, and a vaccine that killed 1 in a million of those vaccinated and made about 1 in 100,000 seriously ill. In today's situation facing coronavirus, that level of side effect could perhaps be tolerated, at least until we came up with something better. Careful analysis and simulation can minimize the cost. China has cut the R0 down to 0.3, but that's overkill. At this point, a relaxation that allowed some business to operate and push the R0 up to 0.8 would be fine. The rate of new cases would not increase from the current low level. If we relax a bit too much, R0 might creep a bit above 1.0, but with lots of testing and monitoring, we could fix that before it caused much trouble. I don't know, it seems to me that in the absence of widespread testing, it's difficult to talk knowledgeably about just how virulent coronavirus is. Let's see what the chat has to say. Aaron Amahud says, tourism should die a horrible death. The rise of the tourism industry is, we all take it for granted that millions upon millions of people fly all over the place all the time. But yes, it could be true that tourism has passed its peak. John Miller says this is a great time to bring back industry. I suppose that's one of the things that Trump is considering. It's easier to sell things if you couch it in the form of national security, and America's national security is obviously not helped by being so dependent on China, a monstrous country which bears us ill will. What else? No, it reminded me of something. When I went to Paris many years ago, it seemed that just like the cliche has it, the Parisians were not overjoyed to see tourists. And I felt offended at the time, but afterwards I thought, why should they be? Why should they look forward to their cities being overrun by strangers asking them stupid questions in mangled French or just in English, based on the assumption that everyone around the world speaks English? James Fountain says, can we use the virus as an excuse to make Australia keep Tom Hanks for good? I thought Tom Hanks was the beloved everyman. But he says, people in my locale are panic buying at the stores like never before. Yes, I have already seen the preppers boasting up a storm. Oh, I was ahead of the curve on this one. Yeah, I wouldn't advise them to carry on in that way. But I guess they just can't see, they just can't help themselves. Okay, all right. A special day when the show kicks off with a Clockwork Orange reference. Indeed, it is. Jonathan Pohl says Tom Hanks has Greek citizenship, so if he is banned from returning to the U.S., he is good. Ricky Bullock says, are these the same experts that didn't take action 2 months ago? Well, that's a good point, because we have heard from experts from the World Health Organization, from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, from the Chief Medical Officer of Canada, that apparently a bigger problem than the disease is the dreaded stigma. It would seem to me that this is more political advice than medical advice. But everything has been politicized. Now, Alex DeLarge says tourism travel accounts for 10% of world GDP. In some countries, it's massive. Damn, looks like no NCAA gambling pool this year. How can I sleep at night? Vegas might die. I've never been to Las Vegas, I suppose, because I don't gamble, and I suppose there are other things to do in Las Vegas, but it's just not the sort of thing that has appealed to me. Governments are very much into gambling now. You know, they profess a love for the people, but they encourage people to bankrupt themselves with dreams of something for money, which it doesn't strike me as being in anyone's best interest. Go to your own restaurant instead of other countries' restaurants, Alex. This is a great time for preppers, strut, and whatnot, says David the Gnome. Mike F says, epidemic of preppers, Schadenfreude. Yes. The Boob Tube says, yo, learn how to cook with dried legumes. Okay. Get a gravity water filter like the Alexa Pure or Big Berkey. EV says, blonde hair has been politicized for God's sake. Someone called Coachulango says, KMG does gamble, though. How about that? And a final comment from the chat for now. Aaron says, I'm looking forward to a tourism-free Passover in Jerusalem. So, this is really China's gift to the world, isn't it? The coronavirus. We're not supposed to call it the Wu flu, the Wuhan virus, or the China virus, but that's where it comes from. Now, while others are panicking, and today I guess is the day when the panic really kicked in. There's no doubt now. The world is now officially, I'm going to call it, the world is now officially panic-stricken. Here's a story from DNYUZ. I don't really know what that is. When Vice President Mike Pence was asked earlier this month if he would feel comfortable taking his children and grandchildren on a trip to Disney World while the coronavirus is spreading, he responded by saying there was no recommendation for Americans to avoid travel. When pressed on the matter, he added that he and his children travel across the country all the time. Well, he is the vice president, yes. Although the vice president didn't directly answer the question, it is one that many people, especially parents with upcoming trips to Walt Disney World and Disneyland, have asked in recent weeks. After all, airlines have announced that they are lowering the number of flights they offer. Amtrak has said it's suspending some service. And the State Department and the Centers for Disease Control have urged Americans not to get on cruise ships. Well, you know, I don't know why people get on cruise ships now, but it takes all kinds. Greg Antonell, the chief executive of Mickey Travels, a New Jersey-based travel agency that helps travelers plan Disney trips, said that agents at his company had been getting a lot more questions than usual about cleanliness and sanitation practices at Disney parks. In fact, is it safe to travel to Disney World has become an increasingly searched question on Google, and on social media, people have been asking it along with, is it safe to go to a theme park? Disney is claiming that business is booming. Antonell says his 9-year-old company, which employs 200 agents around the U.S. and books more than 10,000 Disney trips annually, had its best month of bookings ever in January and then in February. Well, he would say that, wouldn't he? At Disney World on Friday, thousands of people filed into the Magic Kingdom, the most visited park there as usual. Although guests had to press a touchscreen scanner for their fingerprint to enter the park and put their bags into bins for a security guard to look through, hand sanitizer dispensers at the entrance were not within an arm's reach, but a few feet away. Few guests had masks on. So what the Disney theme parks, they're going to try and replicate the airport experience. Golly, that sounds like fun, doesn't it? So I guess the boomers, who we were talking about yesterday, and I'm certainly one of them, they are not going to be cheated of their trip to a Disney theme park because, what's what's life worth living for if one cannot have pictures taken with Goofy? Let's see, Corey Higgins, a mother of two who was at the park with her husband and children for the third time in her life, said she noticed additional hand sanitizer around the park and felt like she saw many people cleaning around the park. Me and my husband have been monitoring things, but didn't feel like we needed to cancel our plans, she said. We have wipes, we have hand sanitizer, we aren't elderly, and honestly, if you're going to get it, you're going to get it. If I'm going to get sick and die, I might as well do it at Disney World. Oh my, oh my, oh my. I don't know how long these theme parks are going to remain open. I mean, shutting down spring training, baseball. I mean, the crowds for those games are certainly much, much less than you would have at a theme park. Certainly. Social distancing is what we have been told we must practice. And yes, as if people today need any encouragement not to have any interaction with the, actual people in the meat space. So, one final thing on this. In a divided America, misery is looking for company from Peter Coleman of The Hill. Yep, it's all Donald Trump's fault. Right now, most Americans are simply fed up. The combination of myriad simultaneous crises, coronavirus pandemic, the stock market freefall, election hacking, oh, please, and freakish weather events, what? A peevish, hyper-partisan Congress that is stalled and increasingly politicized and hysterical opinion-based media have created a vicious and anxiety-ridden culture. Oh, yeah, and of course, Mr. Coleman isn't guilty of any of those things. We live in a society where we're told that it's offensive to use the word actress. I don't understand. They're actors. Women actors are actors. They are not actresses. But wait a minute, don't they give special Academy Awards for actresses? That's not relevant. Our language is turned upside down. Our traditions are all assailed as being outmoded, wicked, racist, homophobic, and the like. And this has all been fanned by our elite and the media. But no, it's Trump that's calling all the anxiety. And it doesn't stop there. Internet algorithms on the three biggest social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, sort us into tribes and pit us against each other, adding further to our society's chaos. Top it off with Donald Trump's ad hoc style of presidential leadership, which the comedian John Mulaney described as like there's a horse loose in a hospital, and it feels intolerable. Yeah, I want to get my political advice from John Mulaney. I thought he was a funny man, and he had a sitcom come out that was written around him a few years ago. John Mulaney bears the distinction of being responsible for what is perhaps the worst situation comedy I have ever seen. So that's the guy you want to take advice from. So why is Italy so badly affected by coronavirus? Guess what? Greed. Anne on Twitter tweets, Northern Italy is the manufacturing capital, fashion capital of Italy. The globalists brought in cheap Chinese labor instead of employing ethnic Italians. After a holiday, those workers brought a virus back, and 600 people have died, and the whole country's in lockdown. Cheap labor kills. David Vance tweets, many Italians in northern Italy sold their leather goods and textiles companies to China. Italy then allowed 100,000 Chinese from the Wuhan-Wenzhou region to move to Italy to work in these factories with direct Wuhan flights. Result, northern Italy is Europe's hotspot for Wuhan coronavirus. The purge, I don't know. We may be heading for a reckoning, a terrible reckoning with globalism. That it's not enough that globalism enriches the 1%, I suppose the top 10%, impoverishes everyone in the middle, takes away our national sovereignty, inundates us with fractious and rebarbative foreigners. But now we find out that globalism literally kills us. So I was speaking about the Spanish flu and how dreadfully stigmatizing that was for Spanish people and people of Spanish descent in the New World. Well, guess what? The Spanish flu wasn't really the Spanish flu. According to an article by Dan Vergano in National Geographic, which cannot be accused of being a right-wing or xenophobic population, the global flu outbreak of 1918 killed 50 million people worldwide, ranking as one of the deadliest epidemics in history. For decades, scientists have debated where in the world the pandemic started, variously pinpointing its origins in France, China, the American Midwest, and beyond. Without a clear location, scientists have lacked a complete picture of the conditions that bred the disease and factors that might lead to similar outbreaks in the future. The deadly Spanish flu claimed more lives than World War I, which ended the same year the pandemic struck. Now, new research is placing the flu's emergence in a forgotten episode of World War I, the shipment of Chinese laborers across Canada in sealed train cars. Historian Mark Humphreys of Canada's Memorial University of Newfoundland says that newly unearthed records confirm that one of the side stories of the war, the mobilization of 96,000 Chinese laborers to work behind the British and French lines on World War I's Western Front, may have been the source of the pandemic. Writing in the January issue of the journal War and History, Humphreys acknowledges that his hypothesis awaits confirmation by viral samples from flu victims. Such evidence would tie the disease's origin to one location. But other historians already find his argument convincing. This is as close to a smoking gun as a historian is going to get, says James Higgins of Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, who has researched the 1918 spread of the pandemic in the United States. These records answer a lot of questions about the pandemic. The 1918 flu pandemic struck in 3 waves across the globe, starting in the spring of that year, and is tied to a strain of H1N1 influenza, ancestral to ones still virulent today. The outbreak killed even the young and healthy, turning their strong immune systems against them in a way that's unusual for flu. Adding to the catastrophic loss of lives during World War I, the epidemic may have played a role in ending the war. Historian Christopher Langford has shown that China suffered a lower mortality rate from the Spanish flu than other nations did, suggesting some immunity was at large in the population because of earlier exposure to the virus. In the new report, Humphreys finds archival evidence that a respiratory illness that struck northern China in November 1917 was identified a year later by Chinese health officials as identical to the Spanish flu. He also found medical records indicating that more than 3,000 of the 25,000 Chinese Labor Corps workers who were transported across Canada en route to Europe starting in 1917 ended up in medical quarantine, many with flu-like symptoms. Well, how about that? So it turns out the Spanish flu was one of China's many gifts to the West. David the Gnome says, do Chinese people feel bad about Corona on the whole? Like, are they reeling from a national loss of face? I live in Victoria, as you know, and I've seen a few Chinese people wearing masks. There's not very many mask wearers here, although that could be because the masks have been hoarded. John Miller says the world needs a hard decouple from China. Well, you're speaking to the choir. Cheap labor. Yes, cheap labor and low prices. That's what we live for now. And maybe that's coming to an end, too. because it's not been good for us. It's been good for the people at the top. Jonathan Paul says, everyone tells me the only important thing in life is a high-paying job, so I wish I had gotten the job. From my own point of view, it seems that materialism is much stronger now than it was in my youth, that it's now routine to mock people that don't have all the latest gadgets or expensive cars, homes of their own, and the like, as losers, which is not something that I noticed in my youth. If everyone's losing money on Bitcoin right now, where is the money disappearing to, says Mike F. I have seen that reported, that Bitcoin is down, which seems counterintuitive, because isn't it supposed to be a hedge against the disaster when paper money is shown to be useless? Someone named Eddie Haskell is clogging the chat saying, watch my vids. Please don't do that. I think one message would be sufficient. So in more anxiety news, it turns out that the internet has failed women. Is there anything that hasn't failed women? And this isn't just anybody saying this. This is Sir Tim Berners-Lee, and he's the fellow who invented the World Wide Web. According to The Guardian, women and girls face a growing crisis of online harms, with sexual harassment, threatening messages, and discrimination making the web an unsafe place to be. The inventor of the World Wide Web said the dangerous trend in online abuse was forcing women out of jobs, causing girls to skip school, damaging relationships, and silencing female opinions, prompting him to conclude that the web is not working for women and girls. Silencing female opinions. I can't say that I have noticed much of that. Is it a necessity for women to be on the internet all the time, particularly on social media? It would seem to me that women who are anxious or fear that they might get anxious could deal with that anxiety by staying off the internet. I was alerted to a curious fact a few years ago that particularly for millennial women, they use Facebook to cyberstalk old boyfriends or would-be boyfriends. And as I've mentioned previously, social media was devised to drive women insane. Why isn't Sir Tim suggesting that women, decouple from the internet? It is really not necessary, to learn on a, in a real-time basis, minute by minute, exactly what the world thinks of you. I think that's good advice on the whole. People say that they want the truth. No, you don't want the truth. And you really don't want to know what people think of you. And because, if you find out what people think of you, you'll be astonished and rather frightened, because it turns out that people have myriad, almost innumerable reasons for disliking people, even people that they don't know. Berners-Lee wrote in an open letter that the world has made important progress on gender equality thanks to the unceasing drive of committed champions everywhere. But wait a minute, how can that be true when the internet has failed women? But I am seriously concerned that online harms facing women and girls, wait for it, especially those of color, from alphabet people communities and other marginalized groups, threaten that progress. How about trans women going on the internet and threatening physical violence against so-called TERFs? Is that part of Sir Tim's internet algebra? Berners-Lee's warning comes a year after he launched the Contract for the Web, a global action plan to save the web from forces that threaten to drag the world into a digital dystopia, Without tackling misogynistic online abuse, the aims of the contract cannot be achieved, he said. It's up to all of us to make the web work for everyone. That requires the attention of all those who shape technology, from CEOs and engineers to academics and public opinions. I suppose you could ask for people to be more polite, but there's a well-known phenomenon on social media, which I'm sure everyone is aware of, where a woman decides to inform the world that men are terrible. And here's all the ways in which men are terrible. And the world would be a much better place without men. And men are not needed. Women can run the world just fine without them. And then so men take offense at this and they respond in kind, whereupon the original poster starts shrieking about misogyny. Again, Twitter, is an open platform. It seems to be moving not to make it an open platform, which I don't understand, because the whole point of Twitter is that it is an open global platform available to anyone. If you are going to state your opinions in public, worldwide, no less, be prepared for some negative attention from strangers. That's how it works. If you don't want to get in a pissing match, don't be the first person to urinate in public. So he also complains, this is Sir Tim, about the digital divide that keeps more than half of the world's women offline. But wait a minute. Apparently the internet is a toxic waste dump for women, which is causing them to skip school and quit their jobs. So isn't it a good thing that there are so many women who do not have access to the internet? According to a survey by Berners-Lee's Web Foundation, more than half of young women have experienced violence online, including sexual harassment, threatening messages, and having private images shared without consent. The vast majority believe the problem is getting worse. And how does he know this? Because they said so. Here's a good way to avoid your private images being shared without your consent. Don't take naked selfies of yourself and then send them to your boyfriend or a would-be boyfriend, or don't let your boyfriend take naked pictures of you on his smartphone, because it's just not a good idea for all sorts of reasons. But if one goes onto Instagram, one finds that women seem to be particularly fond of bearing as much skin as is permissible under Instagram's rules. So, and they send these pictures out to the whole world so that strangers can see them. We see that famous plus-size models take pictures of themselves pumping their breast milk and send that out to the whole world, or of wiping a baby's bottom in an aisle in Staples. Okay, the third threat comes from a badly designed AI systems that repeat and exacerbate discrimination. What? Many companies are working hard to tackle this discrimination, but unless they dedicate resources and diversify teams to mitigate bias, they risk expanding discrimination at a speed and scale never seen before. There's also the possibility that this might lead to people having thicker skins. Amelia Toledo, a lawyer and activist at Fundación Carisma, a Colombia-based group that lobbies for a safer internet, said that women's rights defenders and female journalists were targeted for abuse more than most. So journalism was a boys' club for the longest time. And then women started getting into it. But it turns out that it's just horrible being a female journalist. Well, maybe they should have thought of that before they got into journalism. Again, if your job is to lecture the world on what's what and all of the terrible things that should stop right now because this is not okay, then you should expect some pushback. And yeah, I suppose, the bigger your audience, the bigger the pushback is going to be. Ms. Toledo says, if they are talking about issues that are pressing in the country, questioning the status quo, or denouncing what the state is doing, they will receive a lot of attacks, and there are more and more coordinated attacks from trolls attacking their bodies, their families, or relationships, and insulting how they look. Their opinions are not even discussed. Again, if you don't want people criticizing what you look like, don't disseminate pictures of yourself on the internet. How difficult is that to understand? Oh, they want to control women. They want women to be silent. Really? Is that what they want? Oh, coronavirus. Wait a minute. Here we go. Berners-Lee said the coronavirus outbreak showed how urgent it was to take action. As workplaces and schools are forced to close, the web should be a lifeline that allows people to keep working and children to be educated. He called on companies and governments to tackle online abuse as a top priority this year. Well, guess what, Sir Tim? We have toppermost priorities than internet safety these days. More data needs to be collected and published on women's experiences online, while products, policies, and services should be all designed based on data and feedback from women of all backgrounds, he said. Well, maybe women can have a separate internet. Maybe Sir Tim could build that for them, because we all know that women never bully each other, that women never make catty remarks about how other women look or dress, because, sisterhood is powerful, that women are uniformly encouraging towards each other. Women notice things about, the way that other women look that a man would never, ever notice. You look at all the pedicures, all the attention paid to feet. Apart from Quentin Tarantino, men are not, and Dan Schneider, men are not interested in women's feet. So I have to assume that the vast amount of money which is spent on foot-related consumption is because women are terrified that other women are going to make fun of their feet. So, globalism requires immigration. And we have a piece in the National Observer by pollster Bruce Anderson. You notice that pollsters are increasingly pundits now, and they're increasingly involved in public relations, that they're PR spivs as well. There seems to be a conflict of interest here, because I'm sure that Bruce Anderson's company does polling on the immigration question, but given that we know how much Bruce Anderson loves immigration, doesn't that seed some doubt? Immigrants get the job done, he says. That's from Hamilton, isn't it? Which is the hit musical, which does not appear to have generated any hit songs. Which is because if you look at past musicals, you find that all of these standards came from them. The Hamilton of its day, 50 years ago, which was called Hair, there were about 4 or 5 hit songs that came from that one musical, but I'm not aware of any hit songs from Hamilton. In the last couple of weeks, we at Abacus Data conducted some fresh public opinion research on the topic. Here's what we found. When asked whether more or less immigration was the best way to grow the economy, 55% said less immigration would be better than more. Oh dear. When it comes to ensuring we have money for social programs like health and education, 62% said less immigration would be better than more. How about that? So, it would appear that the tide is turning on globalism. I would think that it's a pollster's job merely to report what the surveys say, not to attempt to massage the data. And here we go. These views don't square with the evidence. Canadians should take note of some important truths recently described by Canada's new Minister of Immigration and Citizenship, Marco Mendocino. Canadians are having fewer children. Our fertility rate is 1.5, but 2 is the number it takes to hold our population steady. Life expectancy is up 11 and a half years since 1960. We're on a fast track to having more old people who need support and fewer workers to help carry the load. What's more, the facts about Canada's economy over the past few decades couldn't be more unequivocal. When immigration is up, our GDP is higher. When levels are lower, the opposite happens. Yes, this fallacy is known as a correlation, is not causation. Okay. Those who worry about the cost of government services if immigration levels go up, they should worry more about who will pay for the services we have if we don't have more immigration. Taxes will go up, deficits will go up, or services will be cut if we don't have more workers paying taxes. There's a problem with this argument, is that it is false. It is utterly false. Let's assume that, even if we got the best immigrants, well, there are all sorts of costs associated with that which are difficult to measure. The bowling alone cost, which is that immigration induces alienation, both in the people who immigrate and in the host country. It destroys community and it destroys trust. There's something like 37 million people in my country, but there are some who believe that it should have 100 million because, bigger is better. Everyone understands that bigger is better. Well, it's certainly better for the globalists. It's certainly better for the 1%. I don't know. Maybe we should just bring in 63 million people from Nigeria. Say they have an awful lot of people. That would certainly raise the GDP. Canada's immigration policy is essentially to import the worst and the dimmest in the world. What a person with an IQ of 60 or 70 could do for the Canadian economy is not one that they consider, but Canada imports an awful lot of people with IQs of 60 to 70. Herbert Grubel is an economist, professor emeritus at Simon Fraser University. I knew him a little back in the day, and I suppose he was a libertarian when he was younger. And he was very much in favor of immigration, more immigration. He was elected as a member of parliament for West Vancouver for Preston Manning's Reform Party. And he told me something very interesting. He said that he spoke with Preston Manning, the leader of the Reform Party, and said, "My personal belief is that immigration is good and we should have more immigration. But I'm supposed to represent my constituents." That was the promise of the Reform Party, that they wouldn't follow their own ideas. They would listen to what the people said, take surveys if necessary, and then do that. And Herb Grubel told Preston Manning that the people of my riding do not want more immigration. And in response, Preston Manning told him never to bring up that subject with him again. At the time, Canada was taking in about 250,000 immigrants annually, and Preston Manning made a somewhat bold proposal to reduce that to 150,000 a year, whereupon he was called Canada's evilest man, a racist, possibly a Nazi, etc., etc. So a while back, Herb Grubel had a piece in the National Post. A recent series of articles in the Globe and Mail suggested Canada should double its annual intake of immigrants to 500,000, with the goal of raising the country's population to 75 million in 50 years and 100 million by the end of the century. The justification for this policy is almost entirely ideological. The larger population is needed to give some weight to the author's efforts to convince the world to follow Canada's model of a truly social democratic, multicultural, and eco-friendly society, yet there is no discussion of the high economic costs the policy would bring. Doug Saunders, the Globe's correspondent in England, listed the benefits of raising Canada's population to 100 million, saying would end the greatest price of underpopulation, which is loneliness. That is just so utterly fatuous, because people in cities where they're just jam-packed, where they're living in buildings 50, 75, 100 stories tall, there's no loneliness there at all, is there, in the big city? What a nitwit. We are often unable to talk intelligently to each other, not to mention the world, because we just don't have enough people to support the institutions of dialogue and culture, whether they're universities, magazines, movie industries, think tanks, or publishing houses. Again, when I started work at UBC in 1974, there were 25,000 undergraduates and 5,000 postgraduates. That is now more than doubled, with the result that there's hardly room to swing a cat around the campus. Sanders continues, this 100 million would put an end to the low population density that plagues large sections of Toronto and Calgary. Greater Toronto has, 4.5 million people now? But I guess Doug Saunders won't be happy until it resembles Hong Kong or Beijing or Shanghai. A recent series of articles in the Globe and Mail suggested Canada should double its annual intake to 500,000. And yeah, so how much does it cost? Well, Grubel and others working for the Fraser Institute, they ran the numbers. And the cost is huge. The average immigrant who arrived since 1985 imposes an annual fiscal burden on taxpayers of $6,000, a total of $25 billion annually when all recent immigrants are taken into account. This is the result of these immigrants having low average incomes and paying correspondingly low taxes, while they are entitled to all the benefits offered by Canada's welfare state. There is no chance to find double the current number of immigrants with better or even the same economic prospects as recent immigrants. Therefore, the Globe's proposal would substantially increase the fiscal burden on Canadian taxpayers. Doubling immigration levels would put downward pressure on wages, and globalists love that, increase unemployment and incidence of poverty. It would raise the return to capital and reduce income inequality. Most important, the low wages would slow the growth in labor productivity by discouraging investment in labor-saving capital and technology. The wealth from natural resources would have to be shared among a larger number of people. Yeah, California is being turned into what, a giant latifundia? That they grow rice in California. That's strange, huh? In a semi-desert there. So they're suffering water shortages in California because agricultural companies are getting close to 90% of it at very low cost. And so they bring in essentially slave labor, much of it illegal immigrants, which is a tremendous economic distortion. These people claim to be in favor of economic efficiency, but they don't want to let that get in the way of the 1% becoming ever richer. If listeners are interested, you can go to the Fraser Institute and you can find the detailed study, the second detailed study that Herb Grubel and his team made. November 10th, 2015, Immigration and the Welfare State Revisited, Fiscal Transfers to Immigrants in Canada in 2014. New policies he talks about, but again, well, the Canadian government has actually decided that, you see, since they control the cities now because of immigrants, they have a problem that conservatives keep being elected in not the cities. So their plan is for all of Canada to be inundated with immigrants, and that way maybe they will win all of the seats because we need more diversity. Well, I would suggest that, Vancouver and Toronto are majority-minority already. Isn't that enough diversity? diversity, as they say, is a code word for anti-white, and presumably the ideal level of white people in our societies would be effectively a zero. But in the meantime, we can look forward to the war of all against all, which is what intersectionality means. So I came across a woman called Licia Brooks, and she is the Chief Workplace Transformation Officer at the Southern Poverty Law Center. And here she is on C-SPAN testifying on white supremacy in the military. Oh dear. Now that's a very, very serious problem. But the military is on the case. According to the Christian Science Monitor, last week the United States Marine Corps took a step toward rooting out racism in military ranks. With the decision to ban troops from having Confederate paraphernalia on bases, General David Berger, the nation's top Marine, weighed in decisively on the side of those who argue that today these items are more likely to be emblems of hostility than heritage. The move comes amid a broader reckoning as the U.S. military grapples with the persistence of racism and extremist ideology among rank-and-file service members. Recent interest in the issue among House Armed Services Committee members has been heartening for many advocates, but congressional action takes time and extensive debate, says Licia Brooks, the Chief Workplace Transformation Officer at the Southern Poverty Law Center. She believes that General Berger's decision represents a concrete step forward. Yeah, how about that? I think that these people really don't like soldiers very much at all, because regardless of all the social engineering, the majority of soldiers, they're always going to be men, and in a volunteer army, they're going to tend to be a particular type of men. What does Richard Cohn, former chief historian for the Air Force and now professor emeritus of history, peace, and war at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, have to say? The Marines are considered a magnet for the tough guys who want to prove their manhood. This was the chief historian for the Air Force? Oh yes, the phony tough of the crazy brave, eh? Why would the United States Armed Forces want to have anything to do with the Southern Poverty Law Center? Perhaps they're looking to Canada for inspiration. Our military, despite costing a lot of money, is useless, completely useless. It doesn't have the equipment that it needs. All of its weapon systems have pretty much collapsed. But the military does serve as a valuable laboratory for social experimentation and a pipeline for sexual harassment and PTSD claims. Congress is also pushing the services to create a database of tattoos fashionable among white supremacists, as well as to better monitor the social media of recruits and eject members who belong to racist groups. Let's see, it was about 15 years ago that the Southern Poverty Law Center said the American Enterprise Institute was a racist group. So what groups could you belong to the Brookings Institution, say, or follow it, and be allowed into the U.S. military then? How about Antifa? I've read that apparently the American military is now having serious problems with Latin American gangs infiltrating its ranks. But as always, the number one problem, apart from stigma, of course, is white supremacism. Okay, let's go to the chat. What does the SPLC have to do with poverty? Well, I guess the old joke is that it eliminated poverty as a problem for those people who work for it, particularly the founders. Curiously, one of the founders of the SPLC repented of his greed and went to work for Habitat for Humanity. I had a piece published about the SPLC in Chronicles some years ago. Yes, the Klan is everywhere. White supremacists are everywhere. Hitler's coming back. So old Jewish women, give us your money because we have terrorized you needlessly. That is the MO of the SPLC. Oh, yes, and someone talking about the chair force. I find that all very amusing, the various derisory nicknames that the various services, American services, have for each other. David the Gnome says, I'm for the American military drafting only liberal white men for their wars in the Middle East. Half Galician says, Vancouver went downhill when they got rid of the Great Skate logo for the Canucks. What is it, an Orca now? I think there was some talk about renaming the team to the Orcas because, you know, everyone loves whales. The whales are just, they're so wise, you know. The Canucks is a strange name for a sports team. To me, it would be like a soccer team named the London Limeys. Is Vancouver still called Honcouver? It could be, I suppose. UBC is called the University of a Billion Chinamen. One hears that a lot, and there are ruder versions of that as well. Jonathan Pohl, who I gather is still looking for a job. I hope you find one soon. The only justifiable immigration into Canada would be for UBC to hire me. As a history professor, you might want to buff up your, let's say, gender role credentials if you want to be hired at UBC. Okay. KMG, now is a good time to hand out moderator status for a couple of decent posters. I nominate Ricky Bullock and John Miller. Okay, I'm just writing that down now. And I will act on that shortly. Okay, we got the Theater Thursday coming up in about 13 minutes. And now we're going to talk about dogs. Americans love dogs. How much do they love dogs? Well, Americans are willing to pay top dollar to keep old dogs alive, and this is from Reuters. You know, I'm reminded of a joke on Saturday Night Live back in the days when it was, occasionally funny. But I guess it was a weekend update. Kevin Nealon was talking about hip replacement for cats. I guess this was about 20 years ago, something like that, 25 years ago. And he said that the cost of the hip replacement was $3,500, which was $3,500 cheaper, $3,500 more than the alternative total cat replacement. So, on a follow-up visit after Sophie Cortellino's life-saving cardiac procedure, Dr. Anna Gelzer was delighted and family members were relieved to see her responding so well. Sophie agreed, her tail wagging excitedly. As the 9-year-old boxer lay on a metal table, Gelzer tried to push up her heart rate as part of a stress test following the procedure in August, a ventricular ablation for an arrhythmia, or irregular heartbeat, the first performed on a dog in the United States. You want a cookie? Gelzer teased. Who wants to go for a walk? Every story has to be full of inanity now. That seems to be the rule, even with Reuters. The jagged line tracing Sophie's heartbeat on the monitor spiked dramatically, but she lay calm and alert, and Gelzer grinned with satisfaction. Sophie is one of countless aging American dogs undergoing cardiac treatments, stem cell transplants, tracheal stents, pacemakers, and other sophisticated, expensive procedures to prolong their lives. I think that, if Bernie wanted to have, a bigger effect in the race, if he really wanted to win, he should have promised universal pet care. But I'm sure there are politicians that are promising that now. If they're not, they will soon. Owners of the dogs, many of whom have been around long enough to watch children grow up and provide support through countless family joys and traumas, are going to great lengths to prolong their lives, paying bills of up to $3,000 for stem cell therapy for arthritis and $7,000 for cardiac procedures like Sophie's. Dogs are like a person, a family member, said Gelzer, cardiology professor at the University of Pennsylvania School of Veterinary Medicine. Nearly half of the nation's 77 million pet dogs are aged 6 or older, a 15% increase in 1987, according to the American Veterinary Medical Association. Larger breed dogs are considered geriatric at 6, smaller breeds at 7. Aging dogs contend with many of the same illnesses as elderly humans, including heart disease, diabetes, and senility. How about that? I thought that after 2007, 2008, that we were likely to see a decline in pet ownership, particularly among millennials, because they simply don't have the money. Instead, pet ownership increased greatly. There doesn't seem to be any, young woman or any woman between the ages of, 20 and 40 who does not have a dog, or so it seems to me. And then it hit me why this was the case. That for millennials, the idea of, for a great many of them, of marriage and a home, all that jazz, they've given up on that. Instead, they get a dog, or sometimes a cat, and they are willing to pay a great deal of money out of pocket for everything pet related. I still see dog walkers. I see these women, sometimes men, with up to 10 dogs on leashes. And, I understand that for some old people, they may not be up to walking their dogs. But if you do not have the time or the inclination to walk your dog, why do you have a dog? This is just another example of conspicuous consumption. I am the type of person who doesn't have to walk my own dog. I pay someone else to do it because, transactional relationships are by far the best. And as the fellow who wrote that novel talked about on the book club, the one about finally some good news by Delicious Tacos, that the protagonist noticed. He found ownership of dogs with women, dates or potential dates, to be worrying. And he reasoned that a small dog is a child substitute for these women, and a large dog is a husband substitute. I think that there is definitely something in that. We're all mammals, says V. Who. Well, I can't argue with that. The dog exists to serve its master's emotional needs. Well, I don't know, sooner a dog than a support horse, a support pony. People are dragging those onto airplanes now. It just seems to be a competition. Just how much of a nuisance can each of us become? But taking a horse onto an airplane, I think that takes top prize. I think that takes the gold medal, or medal rather. And what's the deal, as comedians used to say, with women and pit bulls? It's like the dog, they call themselves pit mommies. And yes, I want a particularly violent dog, which is renowned for, ripping people's scalps off, for killing people, even children, even their owners. Of course, that's a very strong form of apposematism. Certainly, a woman with a pit bull. I mean, the message, stay away from me, couldn't be any clearer. I wanted to talk about Phil Collins, the drummer and singer. There's a very sad article that appeared a few days ago in the Daily Mail. Is Phil Collins' insecurity driving him back on the road? David Jones asks his family and friends why the 69-year-old drummer is reforming Genesis with diabetes, walking problems, and hearing loss. Now, I can't say that I was a particular fan of Phil Collins's after he took over as the singer for Genesis, replacing Peter Gabriel. I'm, Patrick Bateman, of course, a huge fan. The stuff he did with Genesis, it's not my kind of stuff, but it's really top drawer for what it is. And there's a great deal of mockery of Phil Collins these days, and I really don't understand why. He's a fine singer and outstanding drummer. And in the 1970s, he was a kind of go-to guy for the art rock crowd. He drummed for Robert Fripp and Brian Eno. And he had Brand X, his jazz outfit. He worked with John Martin, the great English singer and guitarist. He's produced some fine records, but apparently Phil, I guess he suffers from low self-esteem, which is sad. He sold 150 million records. I thought that would be, enough to have high esteem, but no. Wincing with each agonized step and looking as though he might topple over at any moment, the sight of him hobbling onto the stage was pitiful to behold. Hunched over a walking cane and clad in a commodious black outfit that barely concealed the excess pounds, he was unrecognizable as the pop star whose angst-ridden ballads, cheesy and self-indulgent to some critics, were the definitive sound of the 80s. Wizened, bald, and bespectacled, but admirably stoical and good-humored, this was the Phil Collins I saw in poignant close-up, shuffling into a university hall in Austin, Texas. Not to sing and play the drums, but to give a lecture to a few dozen history buffs on the Battle of the Alamo. Somewhat surreally, the man whose success once rivaled that of Elvis Presley, Michael Jackson, and Paul McCartney is now a world-renowned expert on the fabled fortress siege of 1836, in which 180 Americans, led by Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie, defied the full might of the Mexican army. He even believes he may have been reincarnated as one of the heroic soldiers who fought and died in the battle. And there's various pictures of Phil Collins here where he looks at least a decade older than his 69 years. My close encounter with Collins came 3 years ago when I wrote a series about his tumultuous life for the Mail. Since then, I am reliably told there has been little improvement in his physical condition, despite rigorous physiotherapy sessions and unpleasant electric shock treatment. Having recently marked his 69th birthday, he now suffers from type 2 diabetes. He is deaf in his left ear after decades of performing beside mega decibel speakers, and nerve damage incurred during an operation has left him with a condition called foot drop, which makes it difficult to stand up, much less walk. And we haven't even got to the most debilitating of his ailments, the serious back and neck injury that necessitated his spinal surgery. That was caused by frenetically jerking his aging body in 2007 as he hammered out a drum solo. Understandably, then, there was widespread amazement last week when Collins announced his intention to tour again this autumn with Genesis, the progressive rock band that first brought him to fame in the early 70s. Phil Collins is a rich man, and there are many in the music business who are not rich and are forced to go out on the road, despite their advanced ages and hideous physical appearance. But Phil Collins doesn't need to do that. So why is he doing it? Given that he tripped over during a nighttime visit to the hotel bathroom on his last concert tour, gashing his head so badly that he required stitches, one imagines the insurance premium will be pretty high this time around. I suspect he will be traveling with a minder slash nurse. So apparently his family has blessed this. And then the story gets into Phil's legendary difficulties with girls. His first wife cheated on him, allegedly, when he was on the road, and he wrote a bunch of songs about that. He fired his second wife by fax. Then he married a Thai woman, or half Thai, half Swiss. And there is a picture of this woman called Oriane standing next to Phil in Miami 2 years ago. And this woman, one of her arms, the arm that we see, is covered with tattoos. She has enormous fake breasts. Her lips are pumped up with collagen or whatever. She is frightful to behold. She's involved in what was described as the nastiest divorce battle in the history of Miami. But now Phil has decided to white knight his former wife. I don't know. I suspect that maybe Phil's family doesn't like him very much, because this is a very sad story. And Paul McCartney makes an appearance, and this is not very flattering to Paul McCartney. In 2002, at a Buckingham Palace party, he cringingly asked Paul McCartney to autograph a Beatles biography that he had brought with him. Afterwards, McCartney cruelly mocked him for this, referring to him as Little Phil. Well, given that Paul McCartney has made dozens of rubbish albums since 1970, he's hardly in a position to look down at Phil Collins. So we're going to move to Theater Thursday. And the movie that I'm going to be talking about this week is called The Last Laugh. The German title, Der letzte Mann, which means the last man. And so the title was repurposed for an English-speaking audience. The film was directed by Friedrich Wilhelm Murnau, who is one of the giants of cinema. On my old podcast, I did an illustrated review of his masterpiece, Sunrise, which you can still find on YouTube. Murnau was almost 7 feet tall. He was a pilot in the German army in the First World War. It's lucky it was open. Cockpit was open in those days. He was mentored by Max Reinhardt. He studied literature, and then he got into films in the late teens, just over 100 years ago. I suppose that Murnau, he made the very first cult film, which was Nosferatu, which came out in 1922. Now, the movie is notorious because Murnau, or the film company, decided that they were going to use the Dracula story pretty closely, but they were not going to pay for the rights. So Bram Stoker's widow took Murnau and the film company to court. Damages were awarded, and all prints of the movies were ordered destroyed. But one was saved, which is lucky for us. A great many of Murnau's movies are lost, including one he made as late as 1928, called Four Devils. So Hollywood is thought to be where movies originated, but I suppose France and Germany have as much claim to being the progenitors of this new medium as Hollywood does. Germany arguably led the world in the 20s and early 30s in terms of artistic production, but then most of the talent got chased out of Germany and ended up in Hollywood. Murnau, I suppose, along with D.W. Griffith, he is the man who did the most to establish what we consider to be the filmic vernacular. In particular, the movement of the camera. As they say, Murnau made the camera fly. He used various tricks, attaching wires to them, or early handheld scenes. And the use of the studio in his films is really extraordinary, which you see to great effect in The Last Laugh, with these tremendous sets that were built and the use of forced perspective. And one of Murnau's innovations, although I suppose other people could claim it as well, is using the camera as the point of view of the protagonist. And that is what a great deal of The Last Laugh is. We see our protagonist, but then we see the world that he sees. And we see it when he is on top, and we see it when he is on the bottom. Murnau, and you see this in Sunrise, he liked to use the position of the camera to indicate status. That shooting from a low angle to indicate high status, and shooting from a high angle to indicate low status. You see this in Sunrise, where we see the husband towering over his wife, particularly during the times when he is thinking of killing her. And after his humiliation and until they reconcile, you see that Murnau has constantly filmed his wife towering over the huge George O'Brien to indicate her moral superiority. So The Last Laugh, the screenplay was by Carl Meyer, and Carl Meyer, he wrote The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, The Haunted Castle, Tartuffe, and Sunrise, and Four Devils. He was one of the leaders in what they call the chamber drama. That is to say, the lives of ordinary people. The cinematography was by Karl Freund. Karl Freund had an extraordinary career. Besides The Last Laugh, he was a cinematographer for Metropolis by Fritz Lang, Dracula, the original Dracula by Todd Browning, and he ended up filming I Love Lucy. Desi Arnaz wanted it shot on film, and he negotiated a very clever deal with CBS that he, after the initial showing, the premiere showing, he would own the rights to all subsequent showings. And CBS thought at the time, fine, we'll give you this. I mean, who's ever going to want to watch a TV show again? And I suppose Desi Arnaz, through the use of Karl Freund's photography, essentially invented the rerun. The movie stars Emil Jannings, who was a great star in Germany and later in America. I suppose most people will know him from Sternberg's The Blue Angel from 1930. And Emil Jannings was 40 years old when The Last Laugh was filmed. He plays a much older man. You know, the use of makeup and a voluminous beard and padding, but it is an extraordinary physical performance that you see him delighting in his station, the doorman at the Atlantic Hotel. And later you see him exhausted. You see him struggling to climb a staircase. You see, of course, this is a silent film, and the acting is, mostly gesture. It's gesture and, well, facial expressions and eye movements. And Murnau pays a great deal of attention to this, and it pays off in a very big way. So, as mentioned, Jannings is the doorman at the Hotel Atlantic, and he wears a military-like uniform with a cap, including gold braid. And this indicates his place in the world. That there he is, ushering in and ushering out the rich people of the city. And he owes his status to his association with the hotel and with these rich people. The opening of the film is an extraordinary scene. We travel down an elevator, and then we see the traffic through the doors, the endless traffic through the doors. And our doorman, he has an umbrella to shield the rich, and he has a whistle to command people's attention. And this is his hotel. That's the way that he sees it. We see him at his tenement, his apartment building. It's obviously the job doesn't pay very much because these are not luxurious rooms that he shares with his niece, but it is like he is the king of this apartment complex. Everyone admires his uniform. Everyone admires his stately walk. He has a position of authority in this community. He sees a bunch of children bullying another child who turns out to be a young girl, and he steps in and rescues her because that's the kind of man he is. He's a man who wears a uniform. So it's not long into the film when we see that there is trouble for him. Because there is, in this driving rainstorm, there is an enormous steamer trunk on the top of a vehicle, and he has to get it off and get it into the hotel, and he struggles mightily with this. And after this is finally accomplished, he is exhausted and has to sit down in a chair to recover for several minutes, and some child who's also in livery. The hotel seems to employ everyone from 8 to 80. The child in livery brings him a glass of what might be water, but it was probably a hawk, which revives him. But the manager of the hotel has taken notice and written down our doorman's infirmity in his little notebook. He is called in to see the manager the next day, and he already knows that the jig is up, because to his horror, he sees another man at the front of the hotel, dressed in his uniform, escorting people in and escorting out. Now, the manager of this hotel, he's not a cruel man. What he does is he makes it clear to Emil Jannings that he is not up to the job any longer, but the hotel is not going to fire him. They have found him alternative employment, which is as a washroom attendant. And meanwhile, we'll have to have your uniform. This is the lowest moment in his life, clearly, that he is surrendering his personality. He is surrendering that which makes him the man that he is. Now, this is a silent film, and one of the reasons why The Last Laugh is so notable is that Murnau decided that he was going to tell a story without the use of intertitles. That all the narrative exposition is simply shown, with one exception, which comes late in the film. So Jannings is so traumatized by his experience that he realizes that his status at the apartments is compromised, and so he steals his uniform back and maintains the pretense that he still has his old job, especially since his niece is getting married. He has to keep it up for her, but he has to keep it up for himself. The work in the washroom, well, there's a lot of scrubbing, going down on one's hands and knees, finding towels for rich people, rich swells, to dry their hands on. The depiction of the customers in the Atlantic Hotel is not particularly favorable. That they seem to be machines for gluttony more than anything else. And there is the wedding takes place. I must note that the actor who played his niece's husband bears a alarming resemblance to Joseph Goebbels. But the old man has a fine time at the wedding. He gets thoroughly drunk, and he falls into an alcoholic reverie, which is a dream sequence is really amazing, where all of his physical powers have been restored. He is back as the Hotel Atlantic doorman, and he lifts up this trunk as if it's a feather that he hoists it over his head with one hand and throws it up into the air and catches it as it comes down. Well, it's just a brief respite for him because someone from his apartment building goes to bring him some food that she has made, as evidence of his high status. And no, he's not the doorman anymore. Where is he? Downstairs. And she is, well, horrified by this. And then there is a great sequence where we see the faces of the people in the apartment building, that one person is told, and then we see another face, and we see another face, and we see another face. And they are, shall we say, not sympathetic to the doorman's plight. They delight in his degradation. And so he is degraded at work and degraded at home, and life hardly seems worth living. Now, I mentioned the use of intertitles, and there's only one. There's only one, because I guess Murnau is making a meta commentary on Hollywood's need for a happy ending. Because, and the intertitle makes it clear that the ending of this movie is absurd, but that's how it's going to have to be. That there is going to be a happy ending after all. And we see a newspaper that's being passed around that many people see, that a Mexican millionaire had vowed to give his money away when he died to a person who had assisted him. And it turns out that the person who had assisted him was the doorman. And so now the doorman returns to the splendor of the Atlantic Hotel, where everything is brought to him, including, enough caviar to choke a horse. And there was one man in his time of degradation, another employee of the hotel, who took pity on him and was kind to him. And the doorman decides to share his wealth with, I guess, what he considers to be his only friend in the world, because even his niece turned against him after his imposture was revealed. And so we see them smoking their huge cigars and with their own vehicles, their vast vehicles now, which they are led to by paid employees. And it's a happy ending. It's happy to see. It's nice to see that this poor old man didn't live the rest of his life in misery. But of course, it's amusing, as I say, in another way, because Murnau, obviously, he was told what's what. That I suppose a more logical end to this movie would have been with Yanning's suicide, but that sort of thing wasn't popular then and isn't popular now. Now, the German scholar, she later translated to France, or she was chased out of Germany, Lotte Eisner, who wrote the definitive work on German expressionism, The Haunted Cinema. She had some things to say. She also wrote, she was a great friend of Fritz Lang, and wrote a very important book on him as well. She had some interesting things to say about this movie. She said that it could only be a German story. It could only happen in a country where the uniform, as it was at the time the film was made, was more than God. I simply don't think that that's true, that the loss of social status, the costs of this is a universal phenomenon. Obviously, more in some countries than others. And I suppose, that sort of status is more important in Germany than in other places. But I mean, anyone who's ever lost a job will experience what Yannings has gone through, and you'll notice that people treat you differently. That still working in that job? No. Well, what happened? Got fired. Oh, so what are you doing now? Looking for work. Oh, well, keep it up. I'm sure you'll find something great. And then, if you're still unemployed, some months later, you will notice that people don't treat you even with pity anymore. They don't want to be around you because, failure is seen as a communicable disease. So as I say, I think that this is absolutely a universal story. Here is how I saw it. This is a box set from Masters of Cinema, which is a English company. It's called Early Murnau, and it has 6 of his films, including Tartuffe. And it comes with a 100-page book with essays from Lotte Eisner and others. A great deal of care and attention was put into making the Blu-ray of The Last Laugh. The studios were not very good at looking after their property, and a great many early films were printed on silver nitrate stock, which had a propensity to catch on fire. But the studios let their films molder, and a great many of them were completely lost. So it is quite a challenge to bring these old films back. And the Murnau Stiftung, they were responsible for getting the best possible elements from around the world and producing a composite print. And I have to say that one of the joys of recent years has been the fact that a great many films that were either thought lost or were hardly worth seeing because they were in such deplorable condition have been restored. And, we can thank Blu-ray for this because Blu-ray sales provide money, some of the money, a significant part of the money, to rescue old films. The presentation of The Last Laugh on the Masters of Cinema Blu-ray, well, there's a lot of scratches on the film. And of course, since it is in higher definition in Blu-ray, you're going to notice this more than you would on the DVD. But on the other hand, the film really pops. I could hardly believe how vibrant it was, how bright the light was. And, we have the opportunity to now to see films like The Last Laugh in a way that is close to what viewers saw almost 100 years ago, which is an excellent development. Of course, Blu-ray sales have collapsed in recent years because, we're not supposed to own things anymore. Apparently, owning things is bad. St. Steve Jobs taught us that if you want media, then you should get it through the Apple Store, that you should just keep paying again and again for the same things. Like, why would you want to own something? That is a prejudice that faced the movie business at the time of video. Because the earliest videos cost $100. And then some bright spark came up with the idea of slashing the price to a small fraction of that, And the studios, their reaction was, why would anyone want to own films? Well, I guess you want to own films because one reason being the pleasure of ownership. This is a very handsome box, very handsome presentation, and it's there. Whenever you feel the want of an early Murnau film, you can just pick it off the shelf, and there it is for you. But Steve Jobs decided that everything was going to be streamed in the future. And very significantly, he made a decision that Blu-ray was not going to be part of the Apple universe because, the money that people spend buying Blu-rays is money which rightfully belongs to Apple. But there's still a few of us out there who like owning things. I am one of them. If you look at the Masters of Cinema catalog, they have been called the British Criterion Company. I suppose they get tired of that. But both of these companies show a similar good taste in their choices and in a fastidious attention to detail, and especially extras, printed and filmic extras. Masters of Cinema films, most of them are locked, or as they say, Region B locked. Some of them aren't, but if you get an all regions player, then you can access them. As far as German expressionist films go, I think that Masters of Cinema has done a better job than the American company Kino. Of course, another advantage is that film prices, when you buy films from Britain, you're often paying much less than you would in North America. And there's a 20% VAT, value-added tax, which is added to all purchases in Great Britain. But if you're a foreigner buying an import, that is deducted from the cost, which essentially pays for the shipping. So it's a pretty good deal. I mean, you can pick up, you can get a modded Blu-ray player for, I think, under $250 American. And my investment in one, what was it? Let's see, it was 8 years ago. Certainly a very good investment. I'm just going to talk about a bête noire of mine. This region coding and region locking. It's absolutely outrageous restraint of trade. That the studios wanted this because films are released on physical media at different times for different countries. Yes, so what? If you look at 78s, 45s, LPs, CDs, they were all compatible all around the world. And there are many examples of, I suppose, Cheap Trick live at Budokan. It's a famous example of this. Columbia Records did not want, or Epic Records did not want to release it in the United States, and then they found out that it was selling a really significant amount on import, and so it was released and became a huge hit. And if it wasn't for import records, most of the records that I bought in the early 1970s were imports, because the art rock that I liked, American Canadian companies weren't putting this out. In Australia, it is the law there that all Blu-ray players must be region free, because it's difficult to get movies in Australia. There's not very many produced there, so you have to buy them from elsewhere in the world, and Australia is in its own region. So this would have required pretty much all Australians who wanted to watch Blu-ray to buy an all regions player. I really think that there's no excuse for the studios getting away with this. Some of them don't use it. Let's see, Universal, as befitting the name, all of their Blu-rays can be played anywhere in the world. I think all the studios should do that, or alternatively, governments should take the lead from Australia and make Blu-ray players universal and mandatory. I think that would be a good thing for politicians to do. So I am going to take a final look at the chat. James Fountain says, I insist on consuming physical media only, never once used a streaming service and never will. Well, actually, what you get when you stream a movie, typically there's a throughput of about 2 gigabytes. Now, movies typically on the Blu-ray are anywhere from about 25 gigabytes to close to 50 gigabytes. So that means that you are getting a very watered down experience. You are by no means getting the best picture. So, okay, stop coronavirus. Okay, buying lots of Blu-ray lately, says Ricky Bullock. Bought several in the recent Criterion sale. Bought a Universal's Monster set that was on sale for $10. Bought Under the Skin for $6. I have a Universal Monsters set. I paid a lot more than $10 for it. Under the Skin, I love that movie, actually. That's Jonathan Glazer's latest effort, starring Scarlett Johansson. And yeah, the Criterion, Barnes & Noble has sales, I think twice a year. Criterion has its own sales. I mean, Criterion movies are expensive. They're worth it, I think, but they're even more worth it when you're paying half price. You know, there's a lot of people who save up for these Criterion sales. So let's see. It's an ignorant comment to make. Humans are social creatures, so losing status hurts all to some degree. Well, how could anyone argue? How can anyone argue with that? KMG, your chat is being spam trolled. Mod someone now. Okay, I'll do that overnight. So let's see what is coming up on Theater Thursday and what is coming up on the book club. Tomorrow, we are going to be talking about Christopher Caldwell's book, The Age of Entitlement, which is about rule by elites. Next week, we are going to be, on Theater Thursday, we're going to be talking about a James Bond film, my favorite James Bond film, the one and only one that stars George Lazenby. It's from 1969, On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And that week, the next day, it's James Bond week on the KMG show, because we are discussing on March 20th Kingsley Amos's invaluable book, The James Bond Dossier. One of the things he points out about Ian Fleming's James Bond's books is that the people who bought them and read them are doing so solely for pleasure. I mean, there's nothing to be gained by doing it other than to enjoy the book, which is a point which tells very much in Fleming's favor. It's not, it's not fashionable to read James Bond, although President John Kennedy admitted that he was admirer sales in the United States soared. On March 27th, we're going to be talking about the volume 2 of Stephen Kotkin's biography of Joseph Stalin. It's called Waiting for Hitler. On April the 3rd, a work of philosophy by Blaise Pascal, his Pensées. Pascal was planning to write a thematic work, which was never completed. There were fragments, and these are the Pensées that have been collected. And on April the 10th, we will be discussing Yves Lenoir's biography of Saint Edmund Campion. On March 26th, on Theater Thursday, a noir film, a late noir, Orson Welles' 1958 Touch of Evil. On April the 2nd, we're going to Seattle. It'd be the pre-Microsoft Seattle, I guess, back when Seattle was still an American city. Then The Ground Floor of Grunge, singles from 1992. And on April the 9th, a movie about monks in Algeria during their catastrophic civil war, or the terrorists basically declaring war on not just the Algerian government, but on Algeria itself. It's by Xavier Beauvoir. It's from 2010, and it's called Of Gods and Men. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in today, and I would encourage you to press like and to subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you would like to donate, my PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. And once again, thank you so much for tuning in. I will be back tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, and I hope that you all have a delightful evening. Good night.